I mean, I think that there's always this idea of unsung heroes. That it's a very sort of human understanding of like, oh yeah, there are people that don't get talked about, and there are people who do the deeds and then get forgotten. And I think that there's something really beautiful and romantic and sort of sad and tragic about that. That I think we are always attracted to. At least I'm always attracted to.
Welcome to Pixel Therapy, the video game podcast where we look at the games we play through the lens of the player, where what you play is just as important as how you play it, and where emotional intelligence is a critical stat. Every other week, we bring on a guest who may or may not consider themselves to be a gamer to discuss one of the games that made them and changed them, and all the feelings they have about our favorite pastime. I'm your co-host, Jamie. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm your co-host, Spencer. Pronouns they, them.
And this is Pixel Therapy. So pull up that armchair. Feel free to lie down on the couch. We are going to talk about our feelings. Mm-hmm. Spencer, what are you playing?
Thanks for asking, Jamie. Okay, so I'm very excited, as is a bunch of other people, because Ghost of Tsushima just had an awesome update. There's New Game Plus. There's Legends, which is where you get to play with your friends. There's a whole co-op mode. There's like survival mode. It's like a whole thing. And even though I am definitely like a PlayStation Sony Luddite and I don't have I don't even have a headset. Jamie and I did a little co-op Legends mode last night, our little assassin squad. Like literally, like I was cracking up when I was in the tutorial and you were patiently waiting for me to get through the tutorial. And I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be an assassin. What did you pick? And you were like, assassin. And I was like, ah! Well, it's fine. We were both these really cute, like Kitsune, like Yusuke, demon Yusuke vibes. But yeah, like, so basically, Jamie, you and I played co-op mode for a couple hours. It was actually the first time that you and I have just played a game together, but like in different places. And it was like a true like online multiplayer experience. So
yeah, we're real gamers now.
Yeah, we're real. Like thank you.
I also feel like we're total liars because literally a week ago we were like, we don't really play online multiplayer games.
And it was just because I had never, I guess, played one. And now I'm like, take me back.
Oh my gosh, we're going to have to delete last week's episode from the feed.
We're fake.
Hypocrites.
I know. Listen to me. Sucker Punch changed my life with that. Like, I think too, I was excited for it because I had already played the main story and fallen in love with it and fallen in love with the world of Tsushima. And with like I was very comfortable with the equipment and fighting style and weapons. And so I think a lot of the stress of being dropped into this like a multiplayer online world is like, oh shit, okay, where are my weapons? Where am I? Who am I? Who are my teammates even? Like who's on my team and who's on the other team? Like it's very much you just dropped into this chaos. And so I think it was a little bit different because I feel like I was a lot more well equipped to like what I was gonna expect. And then like it was just very exciting to have this world that I was already used to just expanded. It was really cool.
That's a really good point, actually. I feel like that's such a huge part of the stress with multiplayer games, right? Is just getting decent at it, but having to do that in a space where other people are evaluating you. Like when you're playing a single player game, you get to learn the mechanics and get competent at the game in a space that's just yours. And if you fail, you're the only one who's there to witness it. You're the only one who's impacted. So yeah, that's actually a really interesting perspective that I hadn't really considered. That because we got to play Ghost of Tsushima first as a single player game and get good at the mechanics in that space, coming into the multiplayer space is actually inherently less stressful because we already understand the mechanics. And let me tell you, we fucking dominated.
Yeah. Bronze mode? Like, who do you think you're talking to?
So we tried out the story chapters specifically. There's 3 different versions of multiplayer that are coming with this update, and actually I think the 3rd version isn't quite ready yet. But the versions are there's 2-player co-op story missions that you can do, which is what Spencer and I played. There's a 4-player co-op survival mode, where it's 4 players facing off against hordes of enemies, waves of enemies.
Which is coming.
No, that one's already here.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah, the survival mode's here. What's coming is the raid.
Oh, the raid, right.
Yeah, so, and I don't know if that's going to be 4 people again, or if it's more than that.
I think it's 4 people. Up to 4.
Okay. And that's basically, if you're not familiar with multiplayer lingo, raids are usually just really complex, long sort of missions. Usually lots of enemies, very challenging. The group has to really work together and hone their skills together to be able to beat them. So those aren't quite here yet, but they're coming.
Yeah, but we were in story mode, and just when I was saying bronze earlier, like essentially, like the one thing that I think might be frustrating for players who have already been in Ghost of Tsushima is just like it does kind of force you to go through a bit of a tutorial where you learn all the moves of the different classes. There's samurai, hunter, assassin, and ronin, and the ronin's more of a healer, kind of magic mage type, if you will. But
you can call a spirit wolf or spirit dog.
Spirit dog, and you can pet it, and it's so cute. But what was I saying?
Sorry.
Oh, just the fact that like in the story mode, you have to play through the easy mode to then unlock the medium mode to then unlock the hard mode. So Jamie and I, 2 of Kage's perfect killing machines, found ourselves just sort of like slaying zombie Mongols. That's the other thing, is maybe because it's October, but very spooky.
Yeah. The whole game, or the multiplayer stuff, is all set in, I think it's supposed to be like a spirit world. I gotta be honest, I was having trouble kind of following what they were doing narratively, which is just a thing that I think happens with multiplayer games in general. I'm way more focused on interacting with Spencer than I am on what's happening in the story. So the story is just kind of like set dressing, but the world was like kind of gross and weird. They're like hearts floating in the sky, like oozing blood.
Giant human hearts.
Yeah, but they're like beating and pulsing at the same time. Like, what the fuck is going on? It was not the beautiful world that Ghost of Tsushima has in the main game. So that was a little, it was a cool aesthetic. Like, they definitely put effort into it. I don't want to downplay. I'm sure there was a lot of work involved, but I love the beautiful open world of Ghost of Tsushima, and that was not what we got to experience in the multiplayer.
Yeah, like the way that I was sort of interpreting the narrative, I feel like was that, like, I guess what I gathered is Jin is not the only ghost, right? Like, he is one person whose name has been lost to history, but who has become this mythic presence because of the outsized impact he made on the world around him and the legendary fighting style that he perfected. And so it was like everyone in this multiplayer mode is a ghost. And so to me, I think I was, because they are lost to time and live in stories and in these legends, it's almost like we're being placed into like the world of imagination, or the place between reality and the spirit world where the ghosts live in the kind of human consciousness. As you can see, I love Ghost of Tsushima, and I'm like just spinning up my own mythology. But I was very like it did. I kept being like, we're in Mementos, because it kind of reminded me of Persona 5 in that we were in like Tsushima, but everything had this sort of red pallor, and there was the hearts in the sky, and the Mongols themselves were kind of like these almost wraith-like zombies, and everything was just a little bit off. And the fighters themselves had, like, our assassins had these very demonic masks, and it's cool to see a lot of the features in terms of customization. There's a bunch of cool masks and outfits and weapons you can unlock. But yeah, I think in general, like, with the way the game ends with Jin in his home and sort of roaming the island, collecting the rest of the Mongols, like, I kind of was hoping for a bit more of that open world homesteading feel. Like I have my own secret wish for like the ability to make improvements to the house or just kind of continuously live off the land. And I guess I could still hope for more content, but it was a little bit more restricted in terms of what we could do than perhaps I was expecting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really focused on the combat.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, what a lot of multiplayer games focus on, to be honest. And the combat in Ghost of Tsushima is a lot of fun. I don't see myself revisiting it on my own, like partying up with random people. Like, I would love to play it again with you, but it's not something I'm like feeling compelled to go back to in any real way. And I think that just speaks to kind of like the way I feel about multiplayer in general. And yeah, there's a ton of cool items that you can unlock. I love all of the new masks and gear that they've added. They're all really cool looking. I would love to have all of those, but I'm not so drawn into playing it more that I'm going to go do that just to unlock that stuff. So
yeah, I'm just laughing because I've just reminded me when you said masks, I have to tell you what happened to me because so when we were playing, I was like, oh, I miss Tsushima. I miss the game. So this morning I woke up and I was like, oh, I forgot I'll check out New Game Plus because now there's this whole. So one thing I have to say right off the bat is New Game Plus now includes custom armor loadouts. Like I think the most frustrating thing to me about Ghost was just you have your armor, but then you also have the ability to equip these different charms into different slots to power up different areas. And so if you were switching between like stealth armor and melee armor, conceivably you might want to switch out some of your like melee defense and like just, switch up the build of the armor.
And the game of Ghost of Tsushima incentivizes you with those different builds to not just pick one build and only use that build. Like there's a big incentive for when you're wandering the open world to put on the traveling cloak because that's going to unlock more of your map and it's going to help you find objects and stuff in the world a lot easier. And yeah, when we were jumping into a fight and you didn't have the opportunity to be in stealth mode, like you want to be wearing the armor that's good for melee damage, like either thinking of the intense samurai armor or the Sakai family armor. And then, when you're sneaking into a place, you want to be wearing the ghost armor. So the fact that it didn't have a way to easily swap out those loadouts was, a huge pain point for me with the game as well.
Like you'd have to manually, like my favorite thing would be like, oh, standoff mode, pause for 8 minutes while I just switch out my my charms one by one.
Kind of breaks the immersion a little bit.
Yeah. So like, I love that in this game now with each armor, you can create a custom charm slot build.
That's
and
cool.
Oh my God, that was a huge quality of life increase. But I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. It's great. It drops you right into the open world. So you pick your horse. So this is my first just moment because you choose your horse, but it's New Game Plus, so you still can only choose between 2 horses. But it was cool because I chose my horse Kage, and he's a black horse with this like red mane. He's really pretty. So that was kind of a cool, fun surprise. And okay, but here's the thing that I have to tell you about. So the difference in New Game Plus is that when you're riding through the field as Jin in the open world, and there's an icon that pops up on your screen and it's like, visit a mysterious merchant. And so in the distance, you ride up on this mysterious merchant, and he is like this man standing here with a mask that has many faces. It's like this very demonic mask like you'd see in the world from Legends. And I walk up to him and I go, "Who are you?" And the man turns to you and just goes, like he's like talking in this muffled voice. His name is Baku the voiceless merchant, and I just want someone to tell me if Baku is okay, because literally he is this horrifying many expression mask with all of these different horrifying faces, and every time you talk to him, he just speaks back in this muffled, strangled voice of a person who has no mouth. So
No.
somehow Jin knows what he's saying, and he's like, okay, thanks, goodbye, see you later. And I'm just like, hold up, like,
wait,
I just
the fuck?
Like, I kind of feel like when you're Jin in the original game, there's a scene where you fight a demon in order to access a new skill. And I was safely under the assumption that, this must have been a battle that happened in the mind. Like, demons aren't real.
Yeah.
But now,
like some sort of drug, like maybe Jin got dosed or something.
But yeah, Baku can give you cool new armor and new masks that are a new part of New Game Plus. So it's exciting. It's great to have. Like, I'm jumping right into like raiding Mongol camps, and it's actually been like really cool jumping into New Game Plus. But Baku is nightmare fuel, and
that sounds horrifying.
There's some weird shit going on.
I don't really like that at all, but if he has cool shit, then I think it's worth our time.
Exactly.
Are you going to stick with it, you think? Do you think you're going to play through Ghost of Tsushima again?
I might. I am very distracted because I did just impulse buy a Wii, and so I have like Hades and Breath of the Wild. Oh.
For a second I was like, oh my gosh, Spencer, another new console.
I know, it's 2008, I guess. Yes, I bought a Switch, and it's been calling my name, but I gotta say, like, it's a good game. Love me some Tsushima. And I'm so excited. Like, I feel like this is a perfect segue for our guest this week, who is Earl T. Kim, who plays Norio in Ghost of Tsushima.
He sure does really well. And honestly, part of the reason Spencer and I wanted to talk to Earl is just because Norio was one of our favorite side characters in Ghost of Tsushima. We really loved him as a character. And I think in talking to Earl, it really just cemented that he put a lot of himself into the character too. But yeah, we have a really great conversation with Earl about authenticity in acting, kind of the way games acting is changing nowadays.
Yeah.
And also this idea of like the unsung hero and why people are so drawn to that as like this romantic concept. Really, really a wide breadth to the conversation, and really deep and emotional. Earl really went there with us.
Yeah, and when you're talking about authenticity, like, something that really stood out to me was, when you're playing Ghost of Tsushima and you're really observing this tenderness, this chemistry between Jin and Norio, I think that speaks to the real life friendship between Daisuke and Earl. They've also started streaming. They have their own Twitch channel now, D&D Saga, and like, there's a lot of connections between the character that Earl plays and who Earl is in real life. And I think that it makes for this unforgettable, fully fleshed out character that we've all come to love in Ghost of Tsushima. And so, yeah, we're really excited to just share this conversation with you guys, with all of you.
100%. So without further ado, here's our interview with Earl T. Kim.
Earl T. Kim, thank you so much for joining us in the Pixel Therapy studio. We're so excited to be having you here today. For folks who, for some reason, don't know who you are, could you maybe take a minute to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Earl T. Kim. I am an actor, voice actor, performance capture performer, model, director, theater person, film person, creator of stories, and teller of tales, I guess, is sort of the way to put it.
A little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything, yeah. And you've had a really fun acting career. You've popped up in everything from Avengers to Shameless to Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Yeah.
Was the goal always to get into voice acting? Or like, is that a goal of yours? Or how did you sort of end up in... So, for folks who don't know, Earl plays Norio in Ghost of Tsushima, Sucker Punch's latest release, and it seems like it's your first game, right?
It is my debut video game performance, I guess.
Yeah. So was that always a dream of yours, or how did this kind of come
Oh,
together?
well, I mean, yes. I think video game work has always been sort of this weird, like, fantasy of fantasies that my nerdiest core self has always dreamed of doing. But the, I guess, serious actor part of Earl was sort of encouraged to be pursuing TV and film and theater. And it was sort of, it had been on that list, but that list that I keep, like, in the back of the notebook that I don't show anyone. That's like, yes, these are high up on my list of priorities, but they're secrets for me. But really, it's the whole process of, I think, Ghost happening to me is kind of magical and bizarre and wonderful, mainly because I, prior to Ghost, really hadn't had that much experience doing voiceover or motion capture or anything. Most of my wheelhouse is in theater, live theater, and so when I was in LA, I've been living in LA since 2015, and yeah, I got the audition from my agent, just sort of, and the really interesting thing was that they were looking for actors. And I think that's a trend that's happening more and more now with the technology that's been developing, that, and of course you have the incredible swaths of voice actors who are primarily voice actors who are excellent at their craft. But I think that the industry is definitely shifting and changing in ways where I think the desire for authenticity, I think, is a thing that's constantly being refined in just our society. But I think that has really pushed for a lot of companies looking for real people to play these real people in these games that they're trying to make. So yeah, I think I was just a luck. I was very, very lucky in that, I kind of had put video game work out of, like, in like a maybe when I'm a bit more something, like maybe when I'm a bit more established, or it'll be a thing that I can kind of get into, or maybe I can try and get in through sort of like being like voice course, and that, but life and fate and things sort of brought Ghost to me, which I think it's a really interesting story. I've talked about it on my stream and sort of with a couple of people, like, on social media, but I actually originally auditioned for Khan.
Earl.
So there's a bit of so I was originally brought in by the amazing Ivy Eisenberg, who is the casting director for Ghost, who is the casting director for Name It. If it's a video game, she's probably had her finger in it. All of the Call of Duties, like Robot Chicken, like this woman, the things that she casts are incredible, and
her mind.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just really lucky, I think, and Ivy really took a shine to me as far as I guess what I'd brought to Kotun, or tried to, but ultimately she sat me down and essentially was like, "Sweetie, honey, baby, you're doing great. I love everything you're giving me, but I like you a little too much."
Yeah.
And I have to not like Khan at all. And it was the most wonderful and, like, heartbreaking, but, like, oh my God, I'm so glad someone's actually having this conversation with me, because, because really when I first got that initial audition for Khan, I was like, oh, okay. Like, side note, Earl has played Genghis Khan before, but not at a Renaissance fair early on in his career. We're not gonna, like, try and parse out the logic of why Genghis Khan was at a Renaissance fair. supposedly in some part of England. Anyways, we're
Some
not
would
going to
say
try.
this is a role he's trained his entire life for.
Someday. But also, yeah, but it was sort of that thing where I was like, this role is mine. It's mine to lose.
I was born for this. No, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I think something that Jamie and I have talked about playing the game is there is something about Norio, something about the earnestness, something in his voice that just compels you, draws you to him. And so it's funny to hear you say that your acting for Khojin Khan was listeners liked you too much, because I think that love, that joyfulness, that earnestness within Norio, it's impossible to ignore, and I think lots of people see that.
Yeah.
I did want to kind of go back to something you said earlier, which is just about how more actors are being sought out to be in games, and I think that versus people who come from a more traditional like voice acting background, and I think that there is something really interesting in terms of how gaming has, even in like the past 10 years, I think if you had said, oh, I'm really into video games like 5 years ago, and I think even still today, there's some stigma around it as a hobby that's not really serious. But more and more, I feel like the wall between like fiction and reality, like I feel like with games coming out today, like thinking of like The Last of Us Part 2, for example, like you're really placed into the mind body of these very real people, and there's a weight there that I think is sort of bringing games so much closer to what we experience from theater, from film.
Yep.
And I was wondering, when you said earlier about how you would sort of keep your desire to get into gaming in the background, like you wouldn't share that with folks. It felt unreachable, or something that you would get to later. Like, can you say more about why you felt that way? Like why it felt like something you couldn't.
Yeah, I think you hit a bunch of things on the nose. Is sort of like the stigma around gaming or gamers, or because like I've been a lifelong gamer. My brother, I think I remember playing. We had one of those, like, it was like a fake computer, but it was just like a typewriter, and then there were these cartridges that you could sort of put in, and they were the most rudimentary, like race around the square, like and like space invade, it was like a total knockoff of like a Apple IIe meets an Atari, and I, this is like early 90s. Like from that moment on, I think it was like, okay, I'm a gamer. I love this, and then the Sega Master System and Genesis and all, I was a Sega to PlayStation kid. I was not a Nintendo boy. My partner's a Nintendo boy, which is sort of this really funny, we sit at opposite ends. But I think, there was sort of when I first got sort of into acting and becoming a part of the industry, there is sort of this, I don't know, there's this sort of like, oh, I hope I don't show my cards too early and then get pigeonholed into doing certain things, or, and I think there was a bit of a worry about that if I sort of, like told everyone, like got here and I was like, y'all, I want to like cosplay and like do all these, I'll be the weebiest weeb. But I think that was sort of, the stigma that had sort of existed, I guess, growing up, because really now, like you were saying, Spence, like there is new horizons being brought to our brains and souls and hearts through these games because of this. I mean, just the interactivity around this story, like the way that I love talking about games is sort of similar to how I like talking about theater, but like I used to also work a lot in site specific and sort of immersive theater in that context where audiences often will have to make choices or do things or be sort of make themselves a part of the story that they're actually seeing. And I think that sort of links up with video games in such a seamless way. But I think that really these new stories that have been coming out, like these new like just what's possible in a video game, and how and what we can do with it, I think is, especially like last 10 years, the last 5 years, like it's just shot through exponentially. And it's really wonderful because I feel like now that the technology has sort of caught up / is now pushing the boundary for what's really, really possible when we look at the implementation of technology into storytelling, like sort of the pinnacle and highest point in my brain being like Mandalorian, that the idea of this sort of fully reimaginable and visually seeable sort of digital landscape that's constantly being able to be changed by production. That's sort of the like, whoa, how have we come, and I think that at first I was a little like, oh, I hope I don't show everyone I'm a big nerd. Right, and then I think the more and more that I've sort of personally been learning about my life and my career and everything, it's that I'm that person, and it's kind of okay.
Yeah, it's kind of awesome. Nerds Rise Up 2020.
And so I think, I've even, and I think I just feel so lucky about this opportunity in Ghost in particular, because I think it is, for all of the like numbers reasons of like, oh, the best-selling Sony IP, like all, all these awards and all these accolades, and those are great, but like for me, the things that are truly remarkable are, the cast. The level of care that was put in by Sucker Punch, by Sony, by I think pretty much every single person that worked on the game, as far as knowing the tone and texture of the story and wanting to really honor it, as opposed to trying to shape the story for the needs of the game or the company or whatever. I think that there was a real sort of respect, or at least in my position, I think that there, there was so much care put into all of the choices that were made, that I think, it's such an amazing feat to look and for me to look at the cast and see that the people that they are in real life are the people that are appearing on these screens in a like,
and the butts appearing on the screen.
The butts appearing on the screen, but even in like a way that like Jin has Dice's mole, and that is a thing that could have been so easily like just like not even thought about, and just like, all right, just clean that up there, okay, thanks. But it's there.
It's those touches that make them human.
And I think that that's, again, like going back to the authenticity thing. Like I think that there's just sort of this, I don't know, I feel moles and all, it sort of is able to give this fuller idea of these people and these these legends, these stories, these tales that I think, especially with Ghost, we're sort of supposed to go on that journey of a man becoming legend, becoming Ghost, and I think that constantly still ties back to, but they're people.
Yes.
But they're people. But despite all of this crazy stuff, we're still just people. And I really love that about the game. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know how I got off on this.
I mean, like let's definitely talk about Ghost. I think that something that I've found really relatable as a trans person, specifically as a trans masculine person, is that I see Jin's journey as being one of redefining what it means to be a man, what it means to be a warrior for himself, and pushing back on people like his uncle, who represent what was a sort of becoming outdated way of thinking, a way of thinking that's just as much keeping you a prisoner as it is giving you a place in society. Like I think that his journey of having to redefine and make peace with his relationship with his father, to figure out what honor means to him, and that decision that I won't get into specifics on at the very last moment of the game, and how that it just I cried. I was so emotional after playing that game, and I think it was because I'm not a Japanese samurai in feudal Tsushima, but I am someone who has been told that I am nothing, that I that I deserve to die because I made a decision to break from tradition, to break from what I was allowed to be, or what I thought I was allowed to be. And I think that's something that lots of people can relate to. I'd love to know for you, like, I think too, the relationship between Norio and Jin as a sort of parallel to the relationship between, like, when you compare his relationship with Ryuzo, like, I think that there's a tenderness between Jin and Norio, and there's space for emotion. I think in a way that you don't often see in relationships between two like men. Yeah,
like
like
masculine figures. Yeah, and especially in the sort of context of like traditional Japan. I think there's a lot of stuff in that I one, it's easy to. I think the relationship was easy. Is it's fostered easily just because Dice is a lovely human being, and he's quickly becoming one of my closest friends. And like I think that there is a thing about okay, so this is like random, way back, like bizarre thoughts coming up all of a sudden. But when I was in university, I had an acting professor who basically gave me shit all the time because he thought I was fucking terrible. And it was and he constantly would bring up this thing about, like, when you're on stage, you should only be thinking about sex or death. And that whole concept to me like goes against every fiber of my fundamental being, that it fills me with rage thinking about it now. But like I feel like I had gotten so like weirdly bullied by this concept of like, yeah, when you're acting, it's all like and it wasn't until like going through and then reading an interview with the esteemed Hayao Miyazaki, where he makes a statement about the reason why I don't have romantic relationships between my female protagonists and my male protagonists is because oftentimes they aren't necessary, and we don't need, and I think that there's something in that, like, that I really vibe with, in a way of like just in a way that, like, yes, I don't think that I really fundamentally do not believe that literally all of our actions are motivated purely by sex or a fear of that, like, and I think it's vastly reductionist and all this stuff. Anyway, bringing this back, I think Norio really, for me, when I got the sides, when I got called up, when it was like, hey, we have this other character that you're probably way better for. But one of those things that I sort of noticed is that yes, there's a fear of death, and yes, there is that, but like the relationship between Jin and Norio is this sort of wonderfully platonic, brotherly relationship the thing that I really love about it is that very rarely, I think, do we see that close tenderness between two males, as well as this idea that our beliefs and our ideas and our the things that make us who we are fundamentally as these characters actually influence each other. Like, the time that we spend together in the game actually, like, when you think about sort of the progression of my tales in conjunction with the progression of Jin's primary story, there's sort of this constant balancing that happens where each person sort of leaves an imprint on the other, and then sort of you go away and then you come back and then you're like, what's happened? What have you been doing, Norio? and then like Jin goes away and is like, oh, this thing just happened. Like, and everyone sort of has this like push and pull effect on each other where, you know, it's very similar to real life. Like we see how these characters' fundamental beliefs around life and death and belief and freedom and family are constantly being butted up against, and we see two people who are struggling against those strictures, but in different contexts, like in very, very different ways. And so I think that becomes a really great, I don't know, just a back and forth, just a quick, you know, just it creates this kinetic friendship that's dynamic, as opposed to one that's, I don't know, I feel like, not that the other relationships are different, but like if we do take Ryuzo in sort of vast contrast, they're in that context, neither of them are able to really get past the people that they were to each other. And sort of that creates more hurt, and that creates more division, and that creates this sort of lack of understanding in where we get that ultimate those moments, those conflicts, if you will. And I think that it sort of does, I don't know, I feel like Norio provides this this tender foil.
Something that Jamie and I were talking about Norio that we also loved is that you know, he's a big person and he is a gentle person, and it's never, you never really get stories that have people that have bodies that don't fall within the typical like white Eurocentric idea of what is strong, what is beautiful. And it's really awesome to see a character who is a strong warrior, who is a gentleman, who is a friend, and he's not the butt of a joke. Like, he is just as much of a badass as Jin. And I just think that, you know, as an Asian person too, like, I have never seen Asian men. You rarely see Asian men allowed to, you know, step outside of stereotypes of like being submissive or I know, not having
or
being
being
emasculated,
being the Yakuza heavy.
Right. There's a video that's circulated online of you having a really emotional moment and crying the first time that you see yourself in the game. What were you kind of like? What was that like? Like I can't even imagine turning on a PS4 and like turning my character around and it's like fucking me. Like, what were you? Can you just kind of like bring us back to that moment and like talk about what you were going through?
I mean, really, I think the core of it goes back to that, like, you know, seeing myself, I think, was just a purely surreal experience. Really. And it's really funny because like I had seen like renderings, like we had, you know, I'd even seen a bunch of the scenes like that have been sort of prevised and like using sort of our basic sort of not fully completely animated. So it wasn't like I had never seen, you know, but like I think there was something in, I think the most overwhelming thing for me when playing the game and when I run into Norio is just sort of how real he seems. Like, just, I mean, and this is sort of across the board about anyone, but like I constantly have these moments. There are moments like in certain cutscenes where I see the rendering that's happened on my face, and I'm able to like, I can see like my like weird dissociated memories of like looking at a mirror or like knowing exactly what that face that's being made feels like on my face, which then just sort of is just the most like, whoa, how do you do that? Witchcraft. And I think that I think in that first moment there is sort of all of the Like I hear, that it's a tiny moment of reprieve from all of the bullshit that's in the world. Like really, for me in that moment, it's sort of this like, like, oh my god, this thing that I felt that was so impossible, or that I felt like would never happen, or would never be a thing, or not be reality. Like, holy shit, it's become a thing. Also, like, I feel like there's a certain possibility, and not that it's like with a game this sort of scale, but like there's always a like, oh, it's gonna be delayed, or like, oh, and it was delayed, but like, oh, it's like, oh, and then difficulty came up, and then the game just got canceled. Like,
Right.
like I feel like it's always that like it's not real until I'm actually playing.
Yeah.
And I think that was really like, and I had been playing it, like I had been, because you have to get through all of Act 1 to to get to Norio. But and I think, and knowing like, oh, I'm in there, and like, oh, I've been credited, but then like, oh, what if they like cut everything? Like, what if they like, oh, how did like, because at the end there's pretty much nothing I can do about it. But I think that was sort of, it all just sort of gelled in that moment of seeing Nori. And like, obviously, like my initial reactions, because I'm just the way I am and self-deprecating, like it's like, oh, look at that asshole.
Oh my god, no, it was beautiful. It was an awesome moment. I think Ghost of Tsushima, it surprised me, the narrative and emotional depth. I think those first two acts, I mean, the setup, the payoff, the Jin's journey, it's a lot. And
It
I think
is.
Ghost has lessons about healing from trauma. It has lessons about being open to change. It has lessons about accepting that impermanence is a thing, and there are some things you can't change. What are some things that like you're still taking with you after the game
Well,
is done?
okay, so here's an interesting thing. Norio is a Buddhist monk, and I think I just found it like just the whole process being really interesting, because I went to a Buddhist university, actually, strangely enough. Yeah, I went to this crazy, weird, hippie Buddhist university in Boulder, Colorado.
Oh
Called
my god, Naropa?
Yeah,
I think that's so cool.
I'm a Naropa graduate,
Awesome.
which is very strange. Also because my program no longer exists at Naropa. The performance program was essentially shelled. Also because the university experienced a lot of financial hardships, because in like 26, there was someone was money laundering money out of the university to personal accounts, and it ended up being like upwards of like $1 million, but like essentially money that should have been going to the university and resources and things basically went all to this lady's pocket and her partner's pocket, and it was garbage. And like the FBI got stepped in and all this stuff, but like it did a lot of damage, and it's really unfortunate. And one of the really unfortunate things happening was that my degree program has now been canceled. And then now I recently found out that the entire sort of performing arts structure at the university is kind of going away, which is really, 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 it just kills me. Yeah. Anyways, like my connection to Norio, I guess, is sort of practice based, and sort of that like weird true heart connection based of like, oh right, this person is like a fictional person, but oh dang, there happen to be a lot of similarities with your life. And I think that there's a level in one of the things that I really appreciated about Norio in particular was the openness that the writing team sort of had, and around sort of, because who Norio was from when I was cast to who Norio became. I think there's also been quite a journey in that transformation, and I think that just the ways that everyone was sort of able to bounce around and feedback and really, again, at that point of seeking, like in seeking to serve the story, it doesn't become personal, you know, and in trying to find these characters, it doesn't become personal when it's like, hey, I'm not really sure if this is working, you know, like it's just hey, I'm not really sure if this is going to be the best way to tell this story. And then everyone being like, oh yeah, you know, like I think there's just this like a different mindset. And I think that my background in ensemble theater sort of and devised work has sort of been a large part of my wheelhouse. And sort of, I think that experience, I think, has definitely been really, really helpful in sort of the beast that Tsushima became.
Yeah, like you are Norio. What you brought to that character, he would not exist if you had not done that. So that's it's really beautiful, and I think it does speak to what you were saying earlier about theater and gaming sort of coming closer together, because theater is very experiential. You can't experience it the very same way, just because humans are not going to be able to act exactly the same with every performance. Like every performance is unique, and it's really cool to have that like forever preserved in this game. Like that's a unique character that you brought. That's really awesome.
I mean, I also just like, it's a win for chubby Asian kids everywhere.
Exactly. Yes.
You too can be powerful.
You too can be gay, queer, fat, happy, Asian, powerful. Yes, all of this. Thank you, Earl. In this show, we invite folks to come in and talk to us about a game that had some sort of meaningful impact on their life. So not everyone we interview identifies as a gamer, but every one of us shares a love of games. And so you told us that Final Fantasy Tactics was the game that you'd like to discuss with us today.
It is.
If somehow you had to describe this game to somebody who had never heard of it before, what is like a couple sentences? How would you encapsulate this game?
Oh, God. It is a strategic role-playing game that places you in a world that is experiencing political turmoil. And your character has to do some intense soul searching to figure out who he is and why he's there. Sorry, I was gonna keep going.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
It incorporates many of the familiar aspects of your typical Final Fantasy RPG, and then in many ways subverts them.
Beautiful. Yeah, and so when we were reading about this game, we couldn't help but notice that there was a slight similarity to the narrative in Ghost of Tsushima. This is a story that ultimately centers on a hero who has been lost to time, who has not had his story, preserved in history because powers outside of his control decided that his story should not be told. And, there is something that is really resonant about these stories of these sort of tragic heroes, their selflessness. Like, why do you think these types of stories resonate so strongly with players? Like, what makes them so timeless? Because this game's come out, like 25 years ago?
Yeah.
But these story beats still resonate so deeply.
I mean, I think that there's always this idea of unsung heroes. I think I think everyone has experienced a moment of like, wait, but I did that, or like some moment of like of credit, not of being disproportionately placed in the wrong place, or even seeing or witnessing moments of oh, that person is using their XYZ to get a thing that they might not be the thing that they deserve, or I think that it's a very sort of human understanding of like, oh yeah, there are people that don't get talked about, and there are people who do the deeds and then get forgotten. And I think that there's something really beautiful and romantic and sort of sad and tragic about that I think we are always attracted to. At least I'm always attracted to.
Yeah. And so tell us more about, like, what is it specifically about Final Fantasy Tactics that speaks to you so much?
I think that in a nutshell, Final Fantasy Tactics is a story of allyship. I think it's a story of a young man who, through his own circumstance, is forced to reckon with privilege and power and class and sort of the awful things that humans do to each other, and chooses to change themselves and chooses to. Sorry, I'm getting really emotional thinking about it. Yeah, I think just makes that choice to I guess stop being passive. I think in terms of the greater things happening around them, they choose to I guess look further and do their own research and do all these things. But it's really I think Ramza is such an incredible character that I think he gets very little credit. He is my favorite Final Fantasy protagonist of all time. He's also, like, in one tiny arc of an act, like, Ramza goes through more change than any other Final Fantasy protagonist ever does. Like, shows a level of self-awareness and reckoning in a way that I think this game really, for me as a kid growing up, was like, oh, that's a real fucking hero. On another completely, like, super nerdy level of this game, when I was a young child, I was in Korea when this game came out, and I was at a bookstore that had a bunch of video game magazines, and I remember buying, it was an imported Japanese game. I think it might have been a Famitsu, but it basically included a, like, 100+ guidebook to this game.
Oh my god! Yeah,
that I had never, like, and this game I had never heard of. I had just beaten Final Fantasy VII. Was like, Final Fantasy, you know, like, I think I was like 12 or 11 at the time. Like, I was a wee lad.
Yeah.
But so I was looking at this magazine, and it had this little insert of this, like, chapter book on the, and it had all the art and all of the stuff in this game. I was just like, what is this? What is this? And I basically bought the magazine. At that time, I knew no Japanese, like, absolutely zero Japanese. Like, my mom spoke it, my grandparents spoke it, you know, like, but I myself had no context for Japanese. So, like, I took this little, like, this tiny book that had, like, you know, pictures of the dungeons and, like, layouts and, like, enemy lists and, like, stats and stuff. And, like, I wish I had it. It's at my parents' house, but, like, I took little, like, a tiny little marker and, like, translated little things on the side, like, had my mom's dictionary, my dad, like, I was literally sat there, and it's the first time that I have, like, obsessed over a game in a way that was like, I must know everything about this. like this world, these people, these abilities, this art. Like, I just got so obsessed with it in a way that, and I honestly don't think it would have happened if I didn't have that little, like, because it's like a little chat book. Like, it looks like this little, like, wee little, like, insert, and I wore the shit out of that.
It's funny you say that. Like, I remember being a kid and, like, playing through, like, I feel like today when I play games, I don't have the guide next to me, but something about when I was young, like, I would say, like, 6 to 13, 14, something about having a guide, it almost was like a spell book or a mythology. Like, it had power. It drew me. And when I felt like it was another piece of, like, immersing myself in that world. There's something so magical about them.
Definitely. There's also
Yeah, go
Oh
ahead.
no, I just the like the sheer like advancements that we've made in these, like again it was these like screenshots of these like tiny little pixel, and like maps of like super rudimentary with like red arrow, red arrow, red arrow,
Mm.
X, red arrow, red arrow, red arrow, X, like just these really simple diagrams. And then like now where it's just like, oh, you want to find out how to do the thing, like go on YouTube and like some dude will like walk you through it. Like, but
Yes.
it seemed like a treasure map or
Yeah.
like a book of spells, like some sort of thing that was like, connect
Yeah.
me to this.
Yeah, there was this quote in a Kotaku article called "Why Everyone Loves Final Fantasy Tactics," and the quote was, the story has all the weight and intrigue of a Shakespearean tragedy, and it's an ambitious and epic story delivered using these doll-like characters that look like they could have come from a children's game, and it just from how you're speaking of it too, it there is something so just really cool about that dichotomy of almost this story is hidden behind the facade of what you think on surface level is just your typical tactical strategy game, but when you get into it there is so much more under the surface.
Yeah. I mean, also like there's a whole section of like church intrigue, like the whole like it's a lot of like biblical and sort of church intrigue, and like for me at that
Mhm.
time, having been
Yeah.
a good Christian boy and being terrified of Korean Jesus growing up,
Mm.
uh, um, it's at the point where like that, I'm 12 and I am starting to figure things out about myself that
Yeah.
are making me question a lot of the things that I've been fed in church. And
Yes.
it's sort of like, never brazenly in that way had I like really experienced a piece of media that was like, hey, the church is really corrupt. I know this church is of a church of a completely different religion, like in a faraway land and place. But
Mm.
like, hey, if a church in this faraway land and place could be so terrible, corrupt, and awful, I wonder what that says about churches.
Yes.
Again,
Yes.
not like, if religion is your thing, if it helps you,
Hmm.
if you find a closer connection to the divine through your practice, then great, more power
Hmm.
to you. However, church was not very helpful for me.
Yes. Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that because you're absolutely right. Like as a queer kid who didn't have the language or the access to communities where I would be able to discover that kind of stuff about myself, I think it was games. Games were the first place where, it wasn't my story, but there were pieces of it that I could learn to think of through problems for myself. Like I could learn to take things into my own hands, control my own destiny. I think you're absolutely
No.
right that these games gave us the pieces to sort of put words to these concepts that we feel inside but don't know how to explore otherwise. That's amazing. So Earl, we have been loving this time with you. I do have one question for you that's been on my mind ever since Ghost came out. Um, and that is so Norio has this shoulder contraption. It's like a bunch of balls and it's like a circle. What's in
Yes.
there? What's in there, Earl?
Ration packs.
Okay, his snacks
So it's
and
snacks.
rations.
So it's
Oh,
basically
That's
snacks and
amazing.
supplies. So old Sohei warrior monks,
yeah.
because they would often sort of be like going from one temple to the next and sort
Mm.
of, we're gonna fight all the bad guys from this temple to the next. Didn't really know like when the next time they'd be somewhere. That so they, the way that the packs work also is super super simple. It's literally like a long piece of fabric,
Mm.
and a thing gets placed, it gets wrapped, it gets twisted, and then another thing gets placed and wrapped and twisted. And so it's just this interconnected. It's like a bandolier, I guess, like of
Yeah. Infinite
snacks.
fanny packs.
Yeah. Oh God, it has a. Let me find it. It has a. If there's a name for it. There's a
Yeah.
full like proper Japanese name. Um, just gotta.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it's in an email somewhere.
If you think of it, let us know.
I will. I'll probably send you a message. And be like,
Yeah,
oh, it's
please.
here.
I have to know. Earl T. Kim, thank you again for joining us. Where can folks find you online? What are you up to these days? Anything you want to let us know?
Yeah. Well, since the industry is pretty much halted and theater is uncertain as its future,
Yeah.
what Dice and I have actually been streaming
Yes.
on Twitch, and we are in the process of launching a exciting media empire.
Woo!
Well, I don't know if it's a media empire, but it's basically so. I've been streaming on Twitch at Earl of Sandwich, and there's a T in that one, but my actual handle is Earl of Sandwich with no T. You can find me on Twitter, but yeah, so we do we're doing a co-stream in like an hour and a half.
Awesome.
But basically we're doing Dice streams 2 days out of the week. I stream 2 days out of the week, and then we do a co-stream on Saturdays. So yeah, and then we're in the process of like putting a podcast together and we got a YouTube page coming and all
Cute.
sorts of exciting things.
exciting.
But yeah, I mean, really, quarantine and pandemic has just been one of those like, okay, well, what are we gonna do? Because no one else is doing anything. But yeah, that's what I'm up to. Find me on my socials. Thank you for all of this.
Yeah.
Time is up for today's session of Pixel Therapy. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope that listening to our thoughts and feelings gave you some thoughts and feelings of your own. If you enjoyed this episode, we would very much appreciate it if you could rate us and review us on your podcast application of choice. It does make a world of difference for an up-and-coming podcast like us. And I just want to take a quick second and say thank you to everyone who has been rating and reviewing us.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, like it just... I don't know. We didn't know what to expect starting this, and the amount of like support that we've been getting on there and in other places has just been,
Wild.
wild. Wild is the best way to put it. I can't even articulate it, but thank you so much if you have been rating and reviewing us. And if you haven't, please do. We really appreciate it. And it's important to getting the podcast out there and in front of more people. If you want to reach out to us, maybe you've got a great story about a game that changed you, a guest recommendation, a question, or even just a comment for us, whatever it is, we would love to hear from you, really, truly. You can reach us by email at pixeltherapypod@gmail.com. And hey, who knows? If you write us something interesting, we may just have to read it on the show sometime. You can stay up to date on all things Pixel Therapy by following us on Instagram and other social media at pixeltherapypod, or by visiting our website at pixeltherapypod.com.
Finally, since we like to put our money and our energy where our mouth is, we end every episode of Pixel Therapy with what we call a side quest. Just think of these as ideas for how you can get involved on a local or national scale. Just some really cool causes that have been brought about by our guests and by listeners like you. And this week, Earl T. Kim actually gave us an amazing organization that I'm so excited to talk to you all about. It's called Be an Arts Hero. And you can find them at beanartshero.com. And to be an hashtag arts hero is to be part of an intersectional grassroots campaign that's comprised entirely of arts and culture workers, unions, and institutions in the United States who are working together to push the Senate to allocate more relief to the arts and culture sector to help not just sustain, but revive the American economy. And this grassroots campaign is entirely 100% volunteer run. The arts sector employs over 5 million people in the US and provides more in terms of value to the economy than transportation, agriculture, or even tourism. The arts and culture sector is a cornerstone of the US economy, and yet they've received virtually no support during this coronavirus pandemic. Meanwhile, many folks who work in arts also work in industries like hospitality and service, which have been hit just as hard by the coronavirus pandemic. competition for these jobs has been super, super fierce. And since the federal pandemic unemployment compensation program ran out on August 1st, this month, October, over 40 million Americans have been facing eviction. And this disproportionately affects Black and Indigenous people of color, which is what Be an Arts Hero strives to prioritize as part of their intersectional approach. So right now, you can join and get involved with the Be an Arts Hero campaign through this program they're calling Arts Are My Superpower. And Arts Are My Superpower is a nationwide effort for children, young adults, families, and classrooms to write letters to their local senators, voicing their support for arts throughout the month of October. You can visit the website. Again, that's beanartshero.com to learn more about how you can get involved in their campaigns and how you can be an arts hero. So thank you, Earl T. Kim, for introducing us to this really cool organization. And yeah, find out more about how you can support the arts because clearly we all need them, especially now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that side quest. So that's our show. Go forth, run a story mission, level up some stats, and don't forget to hug an NPC every now and then. We will be back soon with some more
Pixel
therapy. There we go. Nailed it.